Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he carefully brushed dirt away from another piece of ancient stone. The sun on planet Kepler 44 to be burned hot today, and his back ached from hours of digging. He had been working at this dig site for 3 weeks now, and still had not found anything really exciting. The research station sat about 2 miles away from the ruins. Jake could see it through the heat waves rising from the ground. Dr. Amanda Foster was there right now working on translating some symbols they had found last week. Captain Lisa Morrison was probably checking security systems again. She always worried about attacks from space pirates, or worse things. Maya Chen sat nearby working on her scanner. She was the tech expert on their small team. The scanner beeped and clicked as it looked for metal or energy sources under the ground. So far, it had only found more broken pottery and old building stones. Jake had studied ancient civilizations his whole life. When he was a kid, he wanted to be like the archaeologists in old movies who found treasure and fought bad guys. Real archaeology was much more boring. Most days he just dug in dirt and found broken things that told small stories about people who died long ago. But this place felt different. The ruins covered several square miles, and the buildings were made from materials that human science could not identify. The walls had strange symbols that seemed to move when Jake looked at them. From the corner of his eye, Amanda said, the symbols might be from something called the Itherian civilization, but no one knew much about them. The Itherians had built cities on dozens of worlds, thousands of years ago, and then just disappeared. They left behind empty buildings and mysterious technology that human scientists still could not understand. Some people thought they had all died in a war. Others believed they had traveled to another galaxy. Jake just wanted to find something that would help solve the mystery. His brush hit something hard that was not stone. Jake felt his heart beat faster as he carefully cleared away more dirt. A small object began to appear. It was about the size of his fist and made from some kind of crystal that caught the sunlight. The crystal had a strange blue-green color that reminded Jake of deep ocean water. Jake called out to Maya, without taking his eyes off the object. She came over with her scanner and ran it over the area. The device made excited beeping sounds that it had never made before. Maya looked at the scanner readings, and her eyes went wide. She told Jake that the object was giving off energy readings that were off the charts. The scanner could not identify what kind of energy it was. Maya had never seen anything like it in 5 years of working with alien technology. Jake used his smallest brush to clean around the object. It appeared to be some kind of pendant or amulet hanging from a chain made of the same crystal material. The pendant had symbols carved into its surface. The symbols were much more complex than anything they had found before. They seemed to glow faintly with their own light. As Jake worked to free the pendant from the dirt, something strange happened. The symbols on its surface began to pulse with brighter light. The pulsing matched the rhythm of Jake's heartbeat. Maya's scanner started making warning sounds as the energy readings climbed even higher. Jake should have been more careful. He should have called Amanda and Lisa before touching the object. But something about the pendant called to him. He felt like he had been searching for it his whole life, without knowing it. His hand reached out almost by itself. The moment Jake's fingers touched the crystal pendant, everything changed. A wave of warmth flowed up his arm and spread through his whole body. The symbols on the pendant flared with brilliant light for just a second. Then the light faded, and the pendant looked like ordinary crystal again. Maya was asking if Jake was okay, but her voice sounded far away. Jake felt different somehow. The ache in his back was gone. His vision seemed sharper, and he could hear sounds that had been too quiet before. The pendant felt warm against his palm and seemed to pulse gently like a second heartbeat. Jake lifted the pendant and its chain from the dirt. The crystal was perfectly smooth and felt strangely light. The chain was long enough to wear around his neck. Jake found himself putting it on without really thinking about why. The pendant settled against his chest and felt like it belonged there. Maya, was running more scans now and talking rapidly about energy fields and quantum fluctuations. Jake barely heard her. He was looking at the symbols on the pendant, and they seemed almost familiar, like a language he had once known but forgotten. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jake and Maya packed up their equipment and headed back to the research station. Jake told Amanda and Lisa about finding the pendant, but he did not mention how it had made him feel when he touched it. Something told him to keep that part secret for now. That night, Jake lay in his bunk looking at the pendant. In the darkness of his room, the symbols glowed very faintly. Just enough light to see their shapes. Jake traced them with his finger and felt that strange warmth again. He fell asleep holding the pendant and dreamed of stars and voices, calling his name in a language he did not recognize. The dreams felt more real than any dreams Jake had ever had. He saw vast cities floating among the stars. He saw tall, graceful beings with pointed ears and eyes like starlight. One figure appeared again and again in the dreams. A woman with silver hair that seemed to glow with its own light. She was calling to him across impossible distances. Jake woke several times during the night. Each time the pendant felt warmer against his skin. Each time the dreams pulled him back down into sleep. By morning he felt like he had not slept at all, but somehow he was not tired. If anything, he felt more energetic than he had in months. Amanda wanted to study the pendant right away, but Jake found himself reluctant to take it off. He told her he would bring it to her lab later. For now, he just wanted to wear it a little longer. Amanda looked suspicious, but she did not argue. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Jake could work longer hours without getting tired. His hearing and eyesight seemed to improve. Most strangely, he began to understand bits of the Etherean symbols that Amanda was studying. Not enough to read them, but enough to guess at their meaning. Jake knew he should tell his team about these changes, but something held him back. The pendant had become precious to him. More than that, it felt necessary. Like he could not function properly without it. The dreams continued every night, and the silver-haired woman became clearer and more real. On the 7th night after finding the pendant, Jake had the most vivid dream yet. The woman spoke to him, and her words were clear, even though she used no language he knew. She told him she was coming. She told him to wait and be ready. She told him they were connected now, across all the empty space between stars. Jake woke. With tears on his face though, he did not know why he was crying. The pendant was hot against his chest, and pulsing rapidly. Outside his window, the night sky seemed different somehow, like the stars were arranged in patterns that meant something important. 3 weeks passed before anything else happened. Jake had almost convinced himself that the pendant was just an interesting artifact, and the dreams were just his imagination, working overtime. He still wore it every day, and still had the strange dreams, but life at the research station had settled into its normal routine. Then Maya's long-range sensors picked up something that changed everything. A ship was approaching Kepler 442b. It was not human, and it was not like any alien vessel in their databases. The ship was beautiful and terrible, and it was coming straight for them. Captain Lisa Morrison stood in the command center staring at the main display screen. The alien ship hung in space above their planet like a silver teardrop catching starlight. It was beautiful, in a way that made her chest tight with something between fear and wonder. The ship had curves and flowing lines that looked more grown than built. No sharp edges or visible weapons, but Lisa knew that meant nothing. Maya Chen worked frantically at her sensor station trying to get readings on the unknown vessel. Her instruments kept giving her conflicting data. Sometimes the ship registered as solid metal. Other times it seemed to be made of energy or light. The ship was about the size of a human destroyer, but the energy output was unlike anything in their databases. Amanda Foster paced behind Maya, wringing her hands and muttering about first contact protocols. She had studied dozens of alien languages, but had never actually met a living alien. The responsibility of possible translation work was making her nervous. She kept checking and rechecking her linguistic analysis programs. Jake Martinez felt strangely calm as he watched the ship on screen. The pendant hidden under his shirt was warm against his skin and pulsing in a steady rhythm. Something about the ship felt familiar even though he had never seen anything like it. The dreams of the silver-haired woman had been stronger than ever last night. In the dream she had told him she was almost there. Lisa activated the station. Defense systems, but they seemed pathetic compared to the graceful alien vessel. The research station had basic shields and a few plasma cannons meant to drive off pirates. Against advanced alien technology, they would be useless. Lisa sent a message to Earth Command, requesting immediate military support. But help was weeks away at best. The alien ship moved closer to the planet without making any hostile actions. It simply hung in orbit like it was waiting for something. Maya reported that she was picking up scanning beams from the ship. Whatever was aboard was studying the planet and the human research station. Hours passed in tense silence. The aliens made no attempt to communicate. They did not respond to any of the messages that Amanda broadcast in dozens of languages. They just waited and watched. Lisa found the silence more unsettling than threats would have been. Jake felt the pendant getting warmer as the day wore on. By evening it was almost hot against his skin. The pulsing had become faster and more urgent. Jake excused himself from the command center and went to his quarters. He pulled out the pendant and saw that the symbols were glowing brighter than ever before. They seemed to be moving and shifting across the crystal surface. That night Jake dreamed more vividly than ever. The silver-haired woman was standing in a room filled with flowing organic shapes and soft blue light. She was looking at something that might have been a star chart. When she turned toward Jake, her violet eyes were full of joy and excitement. She spoke in that strange language that Jake understood without knowing how. She told him she had found him at last. She told him the waiting was almost over. She told him to be ready, because everything would change soon. Jake tried to ask her questions, but she began to fade as he started to wake up. Her last words were a promise that they would meet when the sun was highest in the sky. Jake woke before dawn with his heart racing. The pendant was so hot, it almost burned his skin. Outside his window, he could see the alien ship hanging in the morning sky, like a second moon. Something was going to happen today. Jake was certain of it. At midday, Maya's sensors detected a small craft separating from the main ship. The shuttle was even more beautiful than its parent vessel. It moved through the atmosphere like it was swimming through water instead of flying. No visible engines or thrust ports, but it moved with perfect grace and control. The shuttle landed about 100 meters from the research station in a clear area that Jake had been using for equipment storage. Lisa ordered all personnel to remain inside, while she and her security team took positions near the main entrance. Amanda activated the translation systems and Jake found himself standing beside her, trying to control his nervousness. The shuttle's surface rippled like liquid metal and an opening appeared where none had been before. 3 figures emerged into the sunlight and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. They were the beings from his dreams made real and solid and impossibly beautiful. The first 2 were clearly guards or soldiers. They wore form-fitting armor that seemed to be made from the same flowing metal as their ship. They carried weapons that looked more like works of art than tools of war. Their movements were fluid and precise as they took positions on either side of the shuttle. But it was the 3rd figure that made Jake's heart stop beating for a moment. She was tall and slender, with silver hair that moved in an unfelt breeze. Her skin was pale with a faint luminescent quality. Her ears came to delicate points and her eyes were the violet color of deep space. She wore robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. She was the woman from Jake's dreams, the woman who had been calling to him across the void between stars. She was real, and she was here, and she was looking directly at the research station with those impossible violet eyes. Lisa stepped forward with her hands visible and empty. She tried to speak words of peaceful greeting, but the silver-haired woman was not looking at her. Those violet eyes were fixed on something else, something that made her take a sharp breath and press one hand to her chest. The woman began walking toward the research station. Her guards moved to follow, but she gestured for them to stay back. Her eyes never left the building as she approached, with quick, graceful steps. Lisa tried to intercept her, but the woman walked past like the human captain was not even there. Amanda was frantically working her translation programs as the alien woman reached the main entrance. She said something in a musical language that made the translation software stutter and fail. The woman paused and then switched to accented but clear English that shocked everyone listening. She asked if Jake Martinez was present. She asked if he was the one who had awakened the soul anchor. Her voice was like silver bells and starlight, and Jake felt something deep in his chest respond to the sound. The pendant against his skin was now so hot it was almost painful. Jake found himself walking toward the entrance, even though Lisa was shouting for him to stay back. He could not stop himself. The pendant was calling to something in the alien woman, and she was calling back. Jake pushed through the airlock and stepped outside into the bright sunlight. The moment the silver-haired woman saw Jake, her composure cracked like ice in spring. Her violet eyes went wide and filled with tears that sparkled like diamonds. She took 3 quick steps toward him, and then did something that shocked every human watching. She dropped to one knee before Jake and bowed her head. When she looked up, her face was radiant with joy and wonder, and something deeper than either emotion. She spoke in English, but her voice was thick with feeling. She called him her fated mate. She said the bond had called across the void and guided her to him. She said she was Lirale Starweaver of the House of Eternal Light, and she had traveled impossible distances to find him. She said the soul anchor had awakened and could not be denied. Jake stared down at the kneeling alien woman and felt his world tilt sideways. The pendant was burning against his chest, and the symbols were so bright he could see their glow through his shirt. His dreams suddenly made sense. The calling across space, the feeling of connection, the certainty that something momentous was coming. But Jake was a practical man of science. He did not believe in fate, or destined love, or mystical bonds between souls. He looked at the beautiful alien woman kneeling before him and felt his grip on reality starting to slip. This could not be happening. Things like this did not happen to ordinary people who dug in dirt for a living. Lirale rose to her feet and stepped closer to Jake. She could see the pendants glow through his shirt, and her eyes filled with wonder. She reached toward him with one graceful hand, but stopped when she saw the fear and confusion on his face. She spoke softly in her musical voice. She told him she knew this was overwhelming. She told him she had not expected to find her mate among the humans. She told him the soul anchor chose its own path and could not be questioned. She asked him to show her the pendant so she could be certain. Jake's hand moved to his shirt without his permission. He pulled out the pendant, and Lirale gasped at the sight of it. The crystal was blazing with inner light, and the symbols were moving rapidly across its surface. Lirale spoke words in her own language that sounded like prayers or blessings. Behind them, more alien shuttles were landing around the research station. Lirale's guards were speaking urgently into communication devices. Amanda was recording everything while Lisa shouted orders to her security team. Maya was taking sensor readings. That would probably keep scientists busy for decades. But Jake only saw Lirale. She was looking at him like he was the answer to every question she had ever asked. Her face was full of hope and longing, and a love that seemed too deep for strangers. The pendant was singing in harmonics that Jake could feel in his bones. Lirale told him they had much to discuss. She told him there were things he needed to understand about what was happening between them. She told him that finding him had changed everything for both their peoples. Jake looked into those violet eyes and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The pendant pulsed once with brilliant light, and then settled into a warm, steady glow. Whatever was happening to him was just beginning. Jake sat across from Lirelei in the research station conference room, feeling like he was living in someone else's life. The alien woman had changed from her flowing robes into simpler clothing that somehow made her seem even more beautiful. Her silver hair caught the artificial light, and her violet eyes watched Jake with an intensity that made his chest tight. Amanda Foster sat beside Jake with her translation equipment spread across the table. She had been asking questions for 2 hours and filling data pads with notes. Captain Lisa Morrison stood near the door with her hand close to her weapon. Maya Chen monitored everything from her sensor station in the corner. Lirelei had been patient with their questions, but Jake could see she was growing frustrated. She kept looking at him, like she wanted to say things that were too private for the others to hear. The pendant under Jake's shirt was warm and seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Amanda asked Lirelei to explain again what she meant by soul anchor. Lirelei closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she looked directly at Jake. Her voice was soft and musical as she spoke. She told them that thousands of years ago, her people had discovered a way to link compatible souls across any distance. The soul anchors were created as tools for finding one's perfect mate among the stars. Each anchor was unique and would only respond to the right person. The practice had been abandoned long ago, when the Etherian civilization began to fade. Most of her people had retreated to hidden worlds or traveled beyond the galaxy. The soul anchors were buried or lost and eventually forgotten. No anchor had activated in over 3,000 years. Jake interrupted to ask why the pendant had responded. To him, he was human, not Etherian. Lirelei smiled and told him that was exactly why it was so remarkable. The anchors were supposed to only work between Etherians. The fact that one had bonded with a human suggested something unprecedented about his people. Amanda leaned forward with excitement. She asked if this meant humans and Etherians were somehow related. Lirelei shook her head and explained that it was not about biology. The soul anchors responded to something deeper than genetics. They found connections between minds and spirits that transcended physical form. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He asked Lirelei what exactly was happening to him. The dreams and the strange sensations, and the way he had been changing since finding the pendant. Lirelei's expression became serious, and she reached across the table to touch his hand. The moment their skin made contact, Jake felt a shock of electricity run through his entire body. The pendant flared with light bright enough to see through his shirt. Lirelei gasped and pulled her hand back, but not before. Jake saw the same shock of recognition in her violet eyes. Lirelei told him the bond was already forming between them. The pendant was changing him on levels that human science could not measure. She could feel his thoughts at the edges of her mind. His emotions were becoming visible to her, like colors in the air around him. Jake stood up abruptly and began pacing around the room. This was too much. He was a scientist, not some character in a fantasy story. People did not have mystical bonds with alien princesses. Things like this did not happen in real life. Lirelei watched him pace with sadness in her eyes. She told him she understood his fear. She had not expected this either. For her people, the soul anchor bonds were legend and myth. Finding herself connected to a human was beyond anything she had imagined possible. Captain Morrison stepped forward and asked the obvious question. What exactly did this bond mean for Jake and for humanity? Were there political implications? Was this going to cause problems between their species? Lirelei's expression became troubled. She admitted that her arrival had already caused complications. Her ship carried a diplomatic mission that had been searching for her for months. When the soul anchor activated, it had sent out a psychic beacon that every sensitive Etherian could feel. They had been forced to follow the signal to this remote world. Amanda asked if other Etherians were coming. Lirelei nodded and explained that word of the bonding would spread quickly through Etherian space. Some would be curious about humans. Others would be angry that their princess had bonded with what they saw as a primitive alien species. Jake stopped pacing and turned to face Lyra. He asked her directly what would happen if he refused the bond. Could he just take off the pendant and go back to his normal life? Lyra's face went pale, and she shook her head. She told him it was too late for that. The bond had progressed too far to be safely broken. Removing the pendant now would cause psychic feedback that could kill them both. The soul anchor connection was permanent. Once it reached a certain point, the room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Jake felt trapped and angry and terrified all at the same time. He had not chosen any of this. He had just been doing his job when he found the pendant. Now his entire life was being rewritten by forces he did not understand. Maya spoke up from her corner. Her sensors had been monitoring Jake ever since Lirale arrived. The readings showed that Jake's body was indeed changing. His cellular regeneration had increased. His neural activity was becoming more complex. Most remarkably, his DNA was showing traces of patterns that matched Aetherian genetic markers. Jake demanded to know what that meant. Maya explained that the pendant seemed to be adapting his biology to make him compatible with Aetherian physiology, not changing him into an alien, but enhancing his human nature to bridge the gap between species. Lirale confirmed that this was normal for soul anchor bonds. Partners were made compatible on every level, so they could share thoughts and emotions, and energy. Jake was becoming something new. Still human, but enhanced and expanded beyond normal human limits. Amanda asked about the political situation. What would Lirale's people think about their princess bonding with a human? Lirale's expression became even more troubled. She admitted that there would be strong opposition from traditionalists who viewed humans as an inferior species, but there would also be those who saw the bond as a sign of something important. The Aetherian civilization had been declining for millennia. Their birth rates were low, and their people were scattered across the galaxy. A successful bond with a human might represent new hope for their survival. Jake sat back down and buried his face in his hands. Everything was happening too fast. A week ago, his biggest worry was whether they would find enough artifacts to justify the dig site. Now he was supposedly destined to mate with an alien princess and help save her entire civilization. Lirale stood and moved to stand beside Jake's chair. She did not touch him, but he could feel her presence, like warm sunlight. She spoke softly, and told him she knew this was overwhelming. She had not chosen this either, but she was not fighting it. She told him she could feel his confusion and fear through their growing connection. But she could also feel something deeper, a loneliness that matched her own, a sense of searching for something he could not name. The bond had not created those feelings. It had simply found them. Jake looked up at her and saw compassion in those violet eyes. She was as much a victim of circumstance as he was. Neither of them had asked for this mystical connection, but it was real and growing stronger every moment they spent together. The conference room door chimed and Captain Morrison received a message that made her face go grim. More ships had appeared in orbit around the planet. Aetherian vessels were arriving, and they were requesting permission to land. Some of the messages sounded diplomatic. Others sounded like demands. Lirale closed her eyes, and Jake felt a strange sensation in his mind, like someone else's thoughts were brushing against his own. Lirale was using their bond to sense the arriving ships. When she opened her eyes, her face was filled with worry. She told them that her uncle had arrived with a war fleet. War Commander Valeth Nightbane was known for his hatred of other species and his belief in Aetherian superiority. He would not accept the bond between Lirale and Jake. He would try to break it even if that meant killing them both. Jake felt the pendant pulse with urgent heat against his chest. Through the window he could see new stars appearing in the sky as more alien ships dropped out of hyperspace. Everything was about to get much more complicated. Lirale turned to Captain Morrison and asked for sanctuary. She and Jake needed time to complete the bonding process before her uncle could interfere. If they could finish the ritual, they would be too strongly connected for anyone to break apart. Jake realized that he was facing the most important decision of his life. He could let them try to break the bond and probably die in the process. Or he could accept what was happening and become something more than human. Either way, his old life was over. The pendant pulsed again, and Jake made his choice. The situation at the research station had become a diplomatic nightmare in less than 24 hours. Captain Lisa Morrison stood in the command center watching, her tactical display filled with more alien contacts. 12 Etherean ships now hung in orbit above Kepler-4 for 2b, and more were arriving every few hours. Amanda Foster had been working around the clock, translating messages from the various ships. Some were diplomatic requests for information about the unprecedented bonding. Others were barely polite demands that Princess Lirelei return to space immediately. A few were thinly veiled threats about what would happen if the humans interfered with. Etherean Internal Affairs. Jake Martinez sat in his quarters, staring at the pendant in his hands. The crystal had grown noticeably brighter over the past day, and the symbols on its surface moved constantly now. He could feel Lirelei somewhere in the station, even with his eyes closed. Her emotions colored the edges of his thoughts like music he could not quite hear. The changes in his body were becoming impossible to ignore. Jake had not slept in 36 hours, but felt perfectly alert. His reflexes were faster than they had ever been. When he looked in the mirror, his eyes seemed brighter and more aware. The pendant was rewriting him from the inside out. Maya Chen burst into Jake's quarters without knocking. Her scanner readings had detected something alarming. Earth Command had received word about the situation and was sending a battle fleet to Kepler-4 for 2b. They would arrive in 3 days, and their orders were to secure Jake and the alien technology by any means necessary. Jake felt sick to his stomach. Both Earth and the Ethereans wanted to control what was happening to him. Neither side cared about what he wanted or what was best for him and Lirelei. They saw only political opportunity and strategic advantage. Lirelei appeared in the doorway, behind Maya. The alien princess had been meeting with the diplomatic representatives from her people's ships. The discussions had not gone well. Her violet eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Jake could feel her distress through their growing connection. She told them that War Commander Valeth Nightbane had issued an ultimatum. Lirelei would return to the Etherean fleet within 6 hours, or he would consider her a prisoner of a hostile alien species. He was prepared to use force to retrieve her if necessary. Jake stood and moved to Lirelei's side. The moment he was close to her, the pendant's warmth increased, and some of the tension left both their faces. Maya noticed the reaction and made notes on her scanner. The bond was definitely getting stronger. Amanda arrived with more bad news. She had been monitoring Earth Command communications and learned that politicians back home were already arguing about how to use Jake's situation. Some wanted to study the pendant and try to duplicate its effects. Others wanted to use Jake as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the Ethereans' captain. Morrison's voice came over the intercom asking everyone to report to the command center immediately. When they arrived, they found her standing before the main display screen with a grim expression. The screen showed tactical information about the ships in orbit, and none of it looked good. Morrison explained that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Etherean ships were beginning to take aggressive positions. War Commander Nightbane had moved his flagship closer to the planet and was charging weapons. Earth's incoming fleet was still 2 days away, but when they arrived, there would likely be a battle. Jake looked at the display and realized that people were going to die because of him. The pendant had seemed like just an interesting artifact when he found it. Now it was the center of an interstellar incident that could lead to war between two species. Lirelei stepped forward and addressed Captain Morrison directly. She said, "There was only one way to prevent the coming conflict. She and Jake had to complete the bonding ritual before either side could interfere. Once the bond was fully established, it could not be broken without killing them both. That would force everyone to accept the situation. Amanda asked what the bonding ritual involved. Lirelei explained that it required both partners to accept the connection completely and without reservation. They had to join minds and souls in a way that would make them permanently linked. The process was dangerous and irreversible. Jake felt fear and excitement war in his chest. The bond was already changing him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Completing it would transform him into something that was no longer entirely human. But the alternative was letting politicians and military commanders tear apart what was growing between him and Lirelei. Maya pointed out that Jake's biology was already adapting to accommodate the bond. Her readings showed that his cellular structure was becoming more compatible with Etherean physiology every hour. The pendant was preparing him whether he chose to complete the ritual or not. Morrison asked how long the bonding ritual would take. Lirelei said it required several hours of uninterrupted connection. They would need to be left alone in a place where they felt safe. The station's medical bay had the right equipment to monitor them during the process. Jake made his decision. He told Morrison to prepare the medical bay and give them as much time as she could. Whatever happened next, he was not going to let fear stop him from finding out what he and Lirelei could become together. Morrison nodded and began issuing orders. She would lock down the station and refuse all requests for Jake and Lirelei to leave. Her small security force would hold off any boarding attempts as long as possible. It was not much, but it was all she could offer. As they prepared to leave for the medical bay, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Maya's sensors had detected incoming shuttles from the Etherean War Fleet. War Commander Nightbane was not waiting for his ultimatum to expire. He was coming to take his niece back by force. Lirelei grabbed Jake's hand and he felt electricity shoot through both their bodies. The pendant blazed with light, and for a moment Jake could see through Lirelei's eyes. He felt her determination, and her love, and her absolute certainty that they belonged together. She told him they were out of time. The ritual would have to begin now, even though the conditions were not ideal. Jake squeezed her hand and told her he was ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Morrison's security team took positions near the main airlocks as the first Etherean shuttle touched down outside the station. Through the windows, Jake could see tall figures in flowing armor moving toward the building. Their weapons were drawn, and their movements spoke of hostile intent. Jake and Lirelei ran toward the medical bay as the sound of energy. Weapons filled the air outside. Morrison was buying them time with her life and the lives of her people. Jake was not going to waste their sacrifice. The medical bay doors sealed behind them, and Lirelei began activating equipment that Jake did not recognize. She had brought artifacts from her ship that would help focus and stabilize the bonding process. The room filled with soft blue light, and the air itself seemed to hum with energy. Lirelei turned to Jake, and her violet eyes were full of love and fear and desperate hope. She told him that once they began the ritual, there would be no going back. They would be bound together for the rest of their lives. She needed to know that he truly wanted this, and was not just trying to escape an impossible situation. Jake looked into those alien eyes and felt something deep in his soul respond. The pendant was burning against his chest, and his whole body thrummed with energy that wanted to connect with hers. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. He told Lirelei that he chose her and the bond and whatever they would become together. She smiled and tears of joy streaked down her luminous cheeks. She reached for him, and Jake stepped forward to meet her embrace. The moment their bodies touched, the pendant exploded with light that filled the entire room. Jake felt Lirelei's mind merge with his own as the bonding ritual began in earnest. Outside the medical bay, the battle for their future raged on, but inside they were lost in each other as two souls became one. The bonding ritual had lasted 3 hours, but to Jake it felt like days or maybe years. He lay on the medical bay floor, holding Lirelei close to his chest as waves of shared consciousness washed over them both. The pendant had become so bright it hurt to look at directly. Then suddenly, the light faded, and Jake felt a profound sense of completion settle over him. He was still human, but he was also something more now. Jake could feel Lirelei's thoughts and emotions as clearly as his own. When he looked at her violet eyes, he saw himself reflected back, but also saw deeper into who she truly was. The loneliness that had driven her across space to find him. The love that had grown from mystical connection into something real and chosen. Lirelei smiled and touched his face with trembling fingers. She told him through their mental link that the bond was complete and permanent now. They were truly mated, in every way that mattered to her people. No force in the galaxy could separate them without destroying them both. Jake helped her sit up and immediately noticed that his enhanced senses could detect things he had never perceived before. He could hear Captain Morrison shouting orders 3 rooms away. He could feel the emotional states of everyone in the research station like background music. Most remarkably, he could sense the approaching Earth fleet still a day away through space. The medical bay doors burst open, and Amanda Foster rushed inside, followed by Maya Chen. Both women looked exhausted and worried. Amanda reported that more security team had managed to repel the Aetheran boarding party, but more shuttles were landing. War Commander Nightbane was preparing for a full assault on the station. Maya's scanner readings showed that both Jake and Lirelei were radiating energy signatures unlike anything she had recorded before. The bonding process had changed them both on fundamental levels. Jake's human biology now carried traces of enhancement while Lirelei showed signs of adaptation to human neural patterns. Lirelei stood slowly, and Jake felt her exhaustion through their connection. She told Amanda that she needed to contact her uncle immediately. Now that the bond was complete, there might be a chance to prevent further bloodshed. War Commander Nightbane would not risk killing his own niece, even if he disapproved of her choice. Jake felt a surge of protective anger through the bond. He told Lirelei that she was not going anywhere near her uncle. The man had already shown he was willing to use violence to get what he wanted. Jake was not going to let him hurt the woman, who was now literally part of his soul. Through the station windows, they could see more Aetheran shuttles landing in defensive positions around the research facility. Morrison's voice came over the intercom announcing that they were completely surrounded. The Aetheran forces were demanding that Princess Lirelei and the human with the soul anchor surrender immediately. Amanda suggested they try to open communications with the Aetheran fleet. Maybe they could negotiate some kind of peaceful resolution. Maya pointed out that Earth's battle fleet would arrive in 18 hours, and when they did, the situation would become even more volatile. Jake felt something strange happening in his mind. The pendant was still warm against his chest, but now it was connecting him to something beyond just Lirelei. He could sense other minds touching the edges of his consciousness. Aetheran minds aboard the ships in orbit. They were all linked through some kind of psychic network. Lirelei noticed his confusion and explained. Through their bond, that enhanced Aetherans could share thoughts and emotions across great distances. The soul anchor connection had given Jake access to this network. He was feeling the minds of her people as they discussed what to do about the unprecedented bonding. Jake concentrated and found he could focus on individual consciousness within the network. War Commander Nightbane's mind was like a storm of anger and disgust. He saw humans as vermin that had contaminated his noble bloodline. Other Aetherans were curious about what Jake represented. A few were genuinely excited about the implications of successful human Aetheran bonding. An idea began forming in Jake's mind. The psychic network connected him to hundreds of Aetheran minds. What if he could show them what humanity really was instead of letting them rely on their prejudices and assumptions? The pendant pulsed with warmth, as if responding to his thoughts. Jake told the others about his plan. If he could broadcast human thoughts and experiences through the psychic network, it might change how they viewed his species. Instead of seeing humans as primitive aliens, they might understand the potential for cooperation and growth. Lirelei was worried about the risks. Jake was still new to psychic communication. Trying to broadcast to hundreds of minds at once could damage his consciousness permanently. But Jake pointed out that they were running out of options. In a few hours, there would be a battle that would probably end with everyone dead. Maya's scanners detected movement from the Etherean forces outside. War Commander Nightbane was preparing for a final assault on the research station. His soldiers were taking positions for a coordinated attack. Morrison's small security force would not be able to hold them off much longer. Jake made his decision. He sat down cross-legged on the medical bay floor and placed his hands on the pendant. Lirelei knelt beside him and took his hand in hers. Through their bond, she would help anchor his consciousness as he reached out through the pre-psychic network. Jake closed his eyes and felt his awareness expand beyond the confines of his individual mind. The pendant blazed with light as it amplified his psychic abilities. Through the network, he could sense every Etherean in the orbital fleet. Hundreds of alien minds suddenly focused on the human consciousness that had appeared among them. Instead of trying to communicate with words, Jake began broadcasting experiences. He showed them his childhood wonder at discovering ancient artifacts, his dedication to understanding lost civilizations, his willingness to risk everything to protect the people he cared about, the simple human desire to explore and learn and grow. The Etherean minds recoiled at first from the unfamiliar human thoughts. But Jake persisted, and gradually they began to understand what they were experiencing. This was not the primitive alien mind they had expected. This was consciousness that was different from their own, but equally complex and beautiful. Jake showed them humanity's greatest achievements and worst failures. The way humans could create art that moved souls across species barriers. The way they could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles through determination and cooperation. The way they could change and adapt and become more than they had been before. War Commander Nightbane's mind was a fortress of hatred that Jake could not penetrate. But other Ethereans were beginning to see humans in a new light. Jake felt their curiosity and wonder as they experienced human consciousness for the first time. Some began to understand that the bonding between Jake and Lirelei represented something precious rather than something disgusting. The psychic broadcast was taking a tremendous toll on Jake's enhanced but still essentially human mind. He felt his consciousness beginning to fray at the edges as he struggled to maintain contact with so many alien minds. Lirelei poured her own psychic energy through their bond to help stabilize him. Through the network, Jake sensed growing division among the Etherean fleet. About half the ships were beginning to question War Commander Nightbane's aggressive approach. They wanted to study this unprecedented human who could interface with their psychic network. A few were already talking about the implications for their declining civilization. But Nightbane was not swayed by the changing opinions of his subordinates. Jake felt the War Commander's mind harden into absolute determination. If he could not retrieve his niece, he would destroy her, along with the human who had corrupted her. His flagship began charging weapons for a bombardment of the research station. Jake realized he had only one chance to prevent catastrophe. He focused all his remaining psychic energy into a single overwhelming transmission. Instead of showing the Ethereans individual human experiences, he showed them the collective consciousness of his entire species. Every human dream and hope and aspiration broadcast simultaneously through the psychic network. The result was beyond anything Jake had imagined possible. Hundreds of Etherean minds were suddenly flooded with the raw essence of human consciousness. They experienced the entire scope of human potential in a single, overwhelming moment. The sheer creative force of human imagination, combined with their drive to explore and grow and become more than they were. Several Etherean ships immediately powered down their weapons. Their crews were too stunned by what they had experienced to continue hostile actions. Even War Commander Nightbane hesitated as he tried to process what the human mind had shown him. Jake collapsed to the medical bay floor as the psychic network connection severed. He had pushed his enhanced abilities far beyond their limits, and his consciousness was fragmenting. Lirelei caught him as he fell, and used their bond to help pull his scattered awareness back together. Through the station windows, they could see that the Etherean forces outside had stopped their advance. Soldiers who had been preparing to storm the building were now standing motionless as they processed what they had experienced through the psychic network. Amanda received an incoming message from the Etherean flagship. War Commander Nightbane wanted to speak with Jake and Lirelei directly. His tone was no longer angry and demanding. He sounded confused and uncertain about everything he thought he knew about humans. Jake struggled to his feet with Lirelei's help. The pendant was now glowing with a steady warm light that seemed somehow peaceful. Through their bond, he could feel that something fundamental had changed. The crisis was not over, but the path forward was no longer leading inevitably toward war. Maya reported that the incoming Earth fleet had detected the psychic broadcast and were requesting information about what had happened. Apparently, some of Earth's psychic researchers had felt echoes of Jake's transmission across interstellar space. Jake looked at Lirelei and saw his own hope reflected in her violet eyes. They had survived the bonding ritual and maybe prevented a war between their peoples. Now, they had to figure out how to build a future where humans and Ethereans could work together instead of destroying each other. The pendant pulsed once more with brilliant light, and Jake knew that his old life was truly over, but the new life, beginning for him and Lirelei, held possibilities that neither species had imagined before. The bond between them was just the beginning of something that could change the galaxy forever.